Data blasted by Andy Crane. All this and more coming up on today's show.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
A bad influence.
Quake Sinclair.
And a retro computer museum to take people on a digital adventure in Leigh.
All these stories and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello chaps, episode number 97 of This Week in Retro. We edge ever closer to the big 100, which I'm really looking forward to. How are we? Dave, how are you doing this week?
Very well. I am even better than I was last week. I've started doing things about the house. I've been up ladders, repairing things, repairing sockets as I showed you, Neil, almost repairing sockets as I showed you, Neil, repairing lights, moving a washing machine, all sorts of stuff. Still playing Baldur's Gate, still sucked into it, but I'm finally starting to get things done about the house, so I'm doing great. How's Outrun?
Outrun's fantastic. Yeah. So the Outrun Upright Arcade arrived this week in the arcade, and
nice.
Okay, the day it arrived, the day Alex went and picked it up, Lily had borrowed my car to go to work. I was editing from home and I thought, okay, Outrun's there. I'm going to jump in her car. I'm going to go to the cave and play Outrun. And got in there, click, nothing happened. The battery on her car was dead. And I was stuck at home. I couldn't get there. So took another 24 hours before I could buy a battery, get that fitted, get my car back from her and drive over. And then I'd spent a good few hours just playing Outrun, and it was just perfect. This cabinet, steering wheel feels great. Original CRT in there. It does have something called a Smarty Pi in there, which is a board which is Pi based, which lets you run Outrun. I think it runs the Cannonball engine on there, so it lets you do some tweaks, like it lets you run it at 60 frames per second, which I've only ever seen on the Saturn version before. It lets you change the color of the car, which I do not like at all. I changed that back to red. When it arrived, the car was yellow. It lets you run the Japanese or the worldwide version, which has a slightly different course layout. I'm only really familiar with the one we had here, so I always play that one. And it also lets you run other games. So you can run Turbo Outrun, Outrunners, Top Speed, which is a Taito game, Power Drift. So you can switch between the games, but I'm just going to keep it to Outrun. Yeah.
But is it the real hardware original Outrun in there, and the Pi does extra stuff on top, or is it? It's not just a cabinet with the guts ripped out and a Pi stuck in, is it?
Unfortunately, at the moment, I think it is just that, and we are going to try and get the original board to put in there, because if you're coming for a museum experience, you want to be playing on the original hardware.
Yeah, so. And I don't want to knock playing on a Pi, but in your circumstances, it has to be the real thing.
It's not what you go there for.
Yeah.
So I think in an ideal world, as with a lot of the cabinets, we'd like to put the original hardware in, and then where possible, we'll have, say, a Mister as a backup next to it, so that we don't have to put an out of order sign on it. We can say, okay, sense. Here's the next closest thing we can have running for you.
Yeah. And a little thing I should mention there, I watched a fantastic video this week. I'm not sure if it's public yet. It probably will be by the time this comes out, from Retro RGB. Bob has done an amazing video on how to set up your Mister for arcade games. It's great. There's all sorts of things in there, things I didn't know about Mister. I'm a basic Mister user. I don't use Mister anything other to get into the games and then I forget all about it. But there's all sorts of configuration things you can do that make it so much better. So that's a good watch.
I will just point out there, Dave, you called it your Mister. You'll get me in trouble if you call it my Mister, unless you mean the multi-system specifically.
No, I don't. When I say your Mister, I mean you're the viewers, the listeners.
Okay.
It's not all about you, Neil.
It's not all about me, no.
It's not the Neil. This Week in Neil.
Oh, easy tiger. Now we did have an email this week from a viewer called Andrew, and this just followed up on the talk of what game was it we were talking about? The Hobbit, wasn't it? The Hobbit. So a chap called Andrew, he emailed in, he said, I tried to leave a comment on the latest This Week in Retro 94, but I think it ended up in the spam filter. I didn't see that one myself, so do apologise. He says, I am a moderator of the Tolkien Collecting Guide, and the website for that is tolkienguide.com. And one of our members has produced 2 excellent articles on the Melbourne House Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings game, which I think your viewers may be very interested in reading. May take a while as both articles are very comprehensive. So we'll put the link to that, to the Tolkien guide, in the show notes if you're interested in that particular. It does make for a good read. Dave, did you have a read? I know this is your area of expertise.
I bookmarked him, but I actually know the chap, or I've spoken to the chap before. He goes by the name of Trotter. He's very knowledgeable. I bumped into him in a different Discord, on the Prancing Pony podcast Discord, and he gave me some help on what Tolkien books to buy. I have recently, or the past year or so, got into buying physical books again, not just ebooks, and I now have a lovely set of Lord of the Rings books, the whole thing, and he helped me with that, so it was funny to see his name come up.
Excellent. Chris, how's your week been this week?
Yeah, not too bad. I wasn't actually going to mention it, but as soon as you mentioned changing the colour of the car on Outrun, I think it fits in with that. This is not a sponsored thing, and I'm not even going to mention the name of the brewery to prove that, but I've been drinking
Mention
this
the name of the
beer.
brewery, go on.
No, I've been mentioned.
They might send us some free beer.
Oh, that's true. It's West Coast IPA, I think. Mega Drive.
Smooth and lovely beer. West Coast.
So just to explain to the listeners, basically, I'm holding up a beer can, but they've put that sort of pseudo retro styling after Outrun. That the car is blue, probably for licensing reasons, but they've done a really good job. It's actually the third one that they've done.
Yeah.
In
see if you hold it still, people might be able to see it. Just hold it to the camera and then hold it still.
Even the listeners, can they see that? If
the listeners might be able to hear it.
Fantastic.
When I'm driving my Ferrari Testarossa, I only drink West Coast IPA.
Yeah, but it's just such a nicely done thing, and they've done 3 of these special editions, and they've called each one like Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3. So they've done Overdrive, Hyperdrive, and now Mega Drive. Really cool just to see retro computer gaming slide through into all sorts of other areas, including beer. I mean,
well, it's the collision of a demographic, isn't it? The collision of people who grew up with 80s arcades and are now getting into real ale drinking or IPA and microbreweries. Yeah.
Does it taste good?
Yeah, it was okay actually. It was a 10%er as well, so it was it was well worth it. Shall I put it
special
that way?
brew stuff.
But in terms of what I else have been doing this week, I did mention last week, because of the time of year it was, I may do some playing of some scary games. I actually didn't do that. I did something even more scary. I pulled apart the 386DX.
Oh,
because do you remember when I slapped it on the desk that it's sitting on, it would reboot. So I completely pulled it apart and then went as far as pulling apart the power supply to try and figure out what it was. I think I've fixed it, but my method of fixing it is not the kind that most people would go for. I basically worked out that it seemed to be shorting out on the base of the inside of the PSU case. So as in the PSU itself.
So it's a short rather than a dry joint. Okay.
Yeah. So all I did was I just put some electrical tape on the bottom of the inside of the PSU to stop it shorting out. And then I put it back together, and then it still seemed to be shorting out. So I thought, well, what's different between that and my test? Because I did test it with a piece of card, and it seemed to fix it. And I thought, the only difference is I've put those screws back in place that actually hold the PCB in place inside the PSU. So I removed the screws, and now it seems to be fixed. So as far as I'm concerned, that's fixed.
I wonder if there's maybe a rubber washer missing on the little screws or something,
maybe
little grommets or something.
Maybe.
And also in PSUs, you would often get like a plastic insert that would sit in the bottom of the tray to stop that kind of thing. So that electrical tape's fine. And as Dave said, I would put some rubber washers in, and then at least you're secured in place and not shorting out.
But at the moment, I can slap that desk as hard as I want, and it doesn't reboot. So that's fixed as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. Now, Dave, I'm looking at the show notes here, and there's a big section which says Dave wants to do some housekeeping. Is that something you want to share with us, or was that a private note?
No. It was a few things I wanted to say. So we've had our platform provider Podbean has inserted adverts, and they have caused people some problems, but we hope that that's fixed. We hope they're not too intrusive, but we hope that they're fixed. We haven't had any reports recently of people having problems, but if you do have problems, then please do let us know. Podbean assure us that they're fixed, but if they do cause you problems, please do let us know. We want you to be able to listen to the podcast in a nice, pleasant way.
The problems were that we were talking in slow motion or something like that. Is that what was happening?
Yes.
It's done it again.
Yeah, slow motion. Yeah, slow motion. I don't know why. We do have a Patreon. We might look at picking up a sponsor just to cover the modest costs that we have for hosting and equipment and so on. But we don't want to beat the drum about it and make things unpleasant. But we're considering whether people would like early access if we've got the show prepared. When I say we, Duncan has the show prepared, perhaps.
No pressure.
He's almost always got it done on a Friday evening. Would you like to see it on a Friday evening rather than wait till Saturday? We don't know. But the show is growing, though, so we do have to thank you for that. If you could leave a like and a subscribe on YouTube, or give us a review on Apple iTunes or wherever you get the podcast, that will help people know about it.
We actually appeared last week when the show went out on Saturday as number 74 in the top 100 UK tech podcasts.
Wow.
There you go. Breaking the top 100 in the UK, specifically
Victory.
the tech. I don't actually know how many overall views and listens we have. We should probably look into that.
It's difficult to tell, but we do things do seem to be going great for the podcast. The listeners send us some really touching feedback, some really genuine feedback, and it makes a difference to us. But all three of us enjoyed doing this anyway. We all look forward to it.
Yeah, good fun. So, I should say thank you as well. Just for everyone there are some people who have been there from the very start, and we're always getting new listeners who are making new comments, mostly positive, the occasional negative one, but it does give us a chuckle, I have to say, when we see them. And just thank you for listening, however you listen or watch. We do really appreciate it.
Episode 100 plan is ready. We've got something a little bit special for that, but don't worry, it's still going to be a normal show. It's not going to be something unusual for you, but we have a super special guest and a few little extras, and Duncan has been saving up some outtakes, and we'll get to those to you soon. We're just trying to work out how to get them to you. Haven't decided yet, so it might be worthwhile to follow us on Twitter, but we might also try, there is a This Week in Retro Twitter account, which Duncan will link, but we might also try YouTube Shorts or even elsewhere if we're feeling froggy.
Froggy, did you say?
Feeling froggy.
I
get that from Aaron at Amigos. He says,
that even
if
mean?
you're feeling froggy.
Oh, is it a Kermit thing?
No, it's feeling brave, I think.
Oh, okay.
Frogs are brave.
Good.
That's how it works. They cross roads and they jump across on logs and stuff.
Okay. Is that the end of housekeeping?
That is the end of housekeeping.
Wonderful. Well, let's go into this week's stories then. Here's a name many of our UK listeners might not have thought about for some years. It's Violet Berlin. Remember her? Well, She's active on Twitter, and she shared a tweet this week which said, 30 years since Bad Influence Today. And it subsequently became the most popular story on our subreddit when somebody posted it there. In fact, that's somebody being Squelch411. So thank you for sharing that story. For those of you who don't know, Violet was one of the presenters of the 90s video game TV show alongside Andy Crane, Sonia Sol, who came later in the series, Andy Ware, who was also known as Namrood, you slimy furtlers, and a young American correspondent, Z Wright. That's Z, not Z, because he's American and that's cooler. Namrood, incidentally, if you didn't know, is doorman, spelt backwards. Took me a long time to realise that, but there you go.
But why?
I don't know. He was never really a bouncer, was he? He never really stood on the door, but there we go.
Your name's not down, you're not coming in.
Maybe. He did have his own sort of private room where he did everything. But yeah. Anyway,
was that the kind of, was Namrood the guy where it was all a bit ropey looking? It was all
and he gave you the cheat codes and stuck them to his forehead and things like that.
He was in the shed originally, wasn't he?
That's right. Yeah. So the show ran from 1992 through to 96. It was a 20-minute format, stretched out with all the adverts thrown in, and it crammed as many platforms as it could in there, and then ended the show with what was called the Data Blast, or at least it did for the first 2 series. I think the Data Blast was eventually dropped, and that was where you had pages of text appeared at the credits at the end of the show, and the idea being that you recorded it and then you played it back on your VHS player frame by frame to read it like a flickery magazine. Bad Influence wasn't the only show in town, of course. We had Games Master, which started in the very same year of 92. But 2 short shows per week was never going to be enough to quench our desire to see the latest and greatest video games in motion. Our consumption of what was good, exciting or not was mostly confined to the static pages of our magazines. And I think it bears saying I cannot underestimate or understate just how exciting it was to not just Bad Influence, but anything whatsoever that you saw on the TV featuring video games, to see previews of new games actually in motion, and to have a sense that others were enjoying this hobby as much as you were, because there was a show dedicated to it, and there were cool, in inverted commas, people on this show and an excited audience, and they were all telling you how great this all was. It was kind of a level of affirmation, I guess, that you weren't alone in this hobby of yours. The modern world of YouTube, game footage, well, all the game footage you could ever want via YouTube and other platforms, is a future that I don't think any of us could have fathomed in 1992. This was as good as it got. And I think it's fair to say that Bad Influence was really aimed at a younger audience, wasn't it? As indeed was Games Master, but Games Master perhaps pushed the boundaries, making it feel slightly more grown up to our young minds, even if in retrospect that really just translated to a bit crass. And I remember particularly enjoying the way they would show not just console gaming on Bad Influence, but generally at the start of the episode, you would have Amiga and PC releases and news, and then they'd kind of move on to consoles. And sometimes you get to see game development tools or animation packages, and the ham-fisted Andy Crane carefully following what was clearly a choreographed routine with the mouse to demonstrate them. I think we all knew he didn't really know what he was doing. Andy Crane had moved across from being a children's TV presenter was he in the Broom Cupboard on BBC doing the children's TV? I think he was, wasn't he? I think he was with... Oh, I can't remember if he had Ed the Duck. Gordon? No, that was Philip Schofield, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was Philip
Schofield.
Anyway, yeah.
He came from a background of children's TV presenting rather than, I guess, technology. As you would. You want presenters. You don't want nerds fronting a show. But it was a little bit clear to us more than...
I disagree. You want nerds.
Well, I think it was a bit clearer to us more than any of the other presenters that Andy was just kind of doing what he was told.
Yeah.
So, first of all, happy birthday, Bad Influence. Dave, we'll come to you first, because I think in the past I've heard you allude that you didn't actually enjoy gaming TV shows of the 90s. Am I right?
Yeah, I feel bad now because you've made them sound so good and such an important part of your life. So I'm afraid I barely watched them. I was aware of them at the time, and I barely watched them, and I don't really feel any attachment to them. People talk about them fondly, and I just stay out of the conversation because I don't want to have a go at other people's memories. But I think I know why. In 1992, I was 17 years old, and I discovered a world of drinking, clubs, gigs, etc. And that was what I wanted to do. So these shows were very much aimed at... I'm trying not to be too mean here, but they were aimed at 14-year-olds who wanted to pretend they were 17 or 18. And if you're 17, 18, 19, that's the last thing you want to do. You'd run a mile from that. So I think that's perhaps why I stayed away. There was programs like The Word on Channel 4, who, for our international or our younger audience, the Word was intentionally as edgy as they could be. They tried to offend, they tried to be rude, they tried to show as much nudity and much sexual content as they could get away with, while still some kind of imagine the Late Show, but with that kind of edgy youth content. And I think that Bad Influence and Games Master were trying to echo a bit of that if they could. Yeah, I didn't watch them, I'm afraid.
And for everything else, there was Eurotrash. But was there any...
Pee and Popo.
Hello, Pee. Hello, Popo. Was there any TV outlet that you turned to for your video game news, Dave?
Yeah, I think Tomorrow's World. I'm very fond of Tomorrow's World. And that's where I got my video game news. But there really wasn't very much on Tomorrow's World, but that's where I got any that I did get from there. So when I see YouTube videos that are presented in a similar way to Tomorrow's World, like Tom Scott's video that we saw last week, or to be honest, like your videos, Neil, then they really do appeal to me. With your hands out, Neil.
You're saying, stop it, Dave. Stop it, Dave.
No, it's true. I've said to you before, I like your videos, and it's it should be no surprise that I like them if I've hung about all this time. But yeah, I do like a kind of an honest, earnest, warm way that Tomorrow's World did, rather than the kind of edgy way.
It was always respectful of the thing it was covering, Tomorrow's World, and I always liked that. maybe sometimes maybe they were a bit too stiff about it, but I always found it entertaining. And I would love to see Tomorrow's World either make a comeback or, I think I've said it before on the show, I want them to make Yesterday's World. I want them to make a retro version of Tomorrow's World where they go back and look at all the old tech and just kind of remember the excitement around it and the futures that these new bits of tech could have, did, or should have bought that perhaps didn't happen because something else happened, and just tell those stories. Yeah. Hello,
but one thing,
BBC.
Yeah, I reckon Neil and Tom Scott together could do it. You need a third wheel, so I don't know who the Maggie Philbin is, but I don't know. But yeah, that kind of honest television is more to my liking. I do like the idea of the data blast, though. I like that. Did you ever do the data blast, Neil?
Well, I've got a confession for you now. I never actually recorded the data blast. I always saw it fly across the screen, and I thought, that's a good idea, but if I try and do that, I'll never be able to freeze the frame perfectly. I think you needed a particular type of VHS player to get a good freeze frame, and we just had the cheap one. So if you tried to freeze a page, it would have just been flickering all over the screen. So, yeah, never actually recorded it. I do remember Z Wright. He was the American correspondent. I think he was like a child actor who they'd just sort of drafted in to do this. But he would go to cool places like, I'm pretty sure I remember him, this might be a false memory, but I think I remember him going to 3DO to see Trip Hawkins and the 3DO setup when 3DO was about to be launched, and we got sort of previews of that. If he didn't do that, that's the kind of thing he did. He got us, first sight of all this new technology coming from far afield. So that was always fun. The show did try to be a bit more mature by Series 3, perhaps influenced by the way Games Master were approaching it with more adult themes. But I think you're spot on there, Dave, by the way you said it was, a show for 14-year-olds trying to come across as a show for 17-year-olds. Yeah.
Yeah, you say more adult and more mature. I mean, for me these days, more adult and more mature is how to balance your radiators. But for them, more adult and more mature is more willy jokes.
Yeah, exactly. More willy jokes. Yeah. And, but I mean, it was probably the right approach to try and take because the demographic was growing older as we moved towards that PlayStation era. And the thing is, that's contrary to their actual channel audience, or at least CITV's channel audience, CITV being the children's slot on ITV or Channel 3 over here. That, on the whole, at the time, was actually getting younger. So they were making a show aiming at older and older kids on a channel that was attracting a younger and younger audience. So those two didn't really marry up properly. And perhaps that led to the demise of the show. I don't know. But the wheels appeared to fall off after 4 series. We only got 4 series of Bad Influence. I think it probably had a few more years left in it, to be honest, with all the excitement of the 32-bit era landing on us and everything beyond that. But it wasn't to be, and we were left with Games Master for a few more years. And then other shows appeared.
Dave Perry
of Games Master, yes. Yeah. Chris, was Bad Influence a show that you enjoyed?
Oh, definitely. I enjoyed it and Games Master. Both, I'd say probably equally, very different, styles. But like you've already said, it was just seeing our hobby, seeing gaming on television was so obscure that it made it awesome, So just see any kind of coverage was great. And I was just always fascinated by seeing things like, the latest consoles they'd always have, talking about even things like the Jaguar and the 3DO and stuff like that before they came out. Dave?
I thought, I know that I'm a few years older than Neil. I can't remember how old you are, Chris. I know that you look as if you're a lot older than me, but...
I think we're about the same age. I was trying to do the maths earlier, but...
I'm 62.
Yeah, you're 62. Yeah, fantastic. I'm actually 73. So there you go.
How old are you?
Listeners are going, anybody listening that's never seen us on YouTube is going to be going, what the heck? But yeah, no, I actually enjoyed Bad Influence. And I think one of the things that stands out for me is, I mean, as you know, I've only recently picked up I say recently, it's over a year ago now, but picking up an Amiga 1200. But I remember back in the day, I completely dismissed the Amiga 1200 as being a slightly cosmetically upgraded A500. I know nothing about it other than what Andy Crane had told me on Bad Influence, which
you were
was
a genius.
Yeah, exactly. But Andy Crane's, review, if you can call it that, of the Amiga 1200 was the fact that it's not compatible with a third of existing Amiga games, and they don't know which third won't work. So as a kid, I'm not sure if back then they knew the weight that their words would have. I mean, clearly, it's pre-scripted. They've only got like 20 seconds to review a new system as they roll on with this fast-paced show. But as a viewer, we actually held on to those things, and we would use those words in playground battles to win, why I'm jumping to PC or whatever. So I remember all he said about the Amiga CD32 was the controller was upside down. He would have said other stuff as well, but it's those negative comments that you go, well, I don't like that, the controller's upside down, and you go and talk to your mates and go, I don't like that, the controller's upside down. So I'm not blaming the demise of Commodore on this one show, but it does have a part to play in why some of us would have made these decisions.
There's a headline. And Andy Crane killed Commodore.
I think he did. No, he absolutely did.
If only a Commodore had done this one different thing, we'd all be using Amigas now, said every Amiga fan ever.
Yeah, that's right. But no, in terms of the show itself, I actually, when I got back into this hobby, around late 2018, early 2019, and I found somebody who I won't say who has posted up in a playlist pretty much every single episode of Bad Influence, and I was just having that massive nostalgia pull of wanting to revisit all of this, and it was fantastic. And I would purposely just watch a couple of episodes first thing on a Saturday morning. Seems really weird to do, but I would have the sun streaming in through the front windows, watch a couple of episodes of Bad Influence, and it felt like being a kid again. It was absolutely fantastic.
Did you do the data blast?
No, I've never done the data blast. And in fact, it would be easy to do now, wouldn't it? Because you just pause YouTube, and yet I've still not read a single page.
Depends on the quality of the capture. It might have been recaptured from somebody's VHS tape.
It was indeed.
It's all flickery. You don't know.
Yeah, some of the episodes are worse than I remember it being on a VHS. It was quite amusing. Yeah. But it's quite interesting, this topic, because I think, I know Games Master essentially recently did a sort of, let's call it a limited edition reboot, which was cool to watch. I actually enjoyed watching it. Very up with the times, both in terms of the games and politically as well. But it sort of, for me, it brings this whole question of rebooting versus rewatching. If you're rewatching, then you're getting the full nostalgia experience because it's literally the systems from back in the day. And same with any show. People, you can rewatch, I don't know, Faulty Towers. That's probably not a good example, but I'll run with it anyway because I've said those words. And if there's a TV in the background, if there's a video player in the background or whatever, that's a nostalgia pull. Whereas if you reboot something like that and bring it into the modern day, you don't get that same hook. I don't think.
Well,
so.
I think when you watch these things, the originals, you're hearing hopefully honest reviews and comparisons between systems at the time on the cutting edge, when these systems are on the cutting edge, and this is as good as it gets. And it's very easy when you look back at something 20 years ago to kind of blur the lines a bit and make comparisons of things that are perhaps in a 5-year window, when actually you would never have considered a Super Nintendo game against a PlayStation game or something like that, even though they're in a period of a short number of years. That is a huge gulf. And it just sort of pulls everything into the right place when you're watching these period accurate things, I think. I like it for that reason. Good. Okay. Well, Violet's tweet, it also says that the best way, in her opinion, to watch the show on YouTube is through a channel called Rose Tinted Spectrum, youtube.com/Rose Tinted Spectrum. A link is in the show notes as well, in which there is a nice layer of sarcastic, very British commentary over the top of the show.
I'm never sarcastic.
In what they've titled Breaking Bad Influence. So you can go and watch all of the episodes with some commentary over the top, or as Chris says, it's not difficult to find just the original captures of the shows as they are, and you can go back and see how we enjoyed, or how many of us, not Dave, but many of us enjoyed British video gaming TV in the 90s.
I'm sorry, I don't want to make anyone feel bad about it.
No, you're not. Yeah. You're not. It's good. This is a place to share our own experiences, and that's yours. Yeah. And also, I would like to hear the experiences of people around the world, because there must be countless video game-based TV shows that we never saw. They might not even be in the English language, but please do leave a comment with a link to them if you can, because I'd love to see the different approaches that different countries took to it, whether it's the serious Tomorrow's World style or some kind of wacky, zany approach. Might be fun to watch.
We've ignored a few story suggestions over the months, guys, let's be honest, but with good reason. And the ones I'm thinking of are Doom running on a tractor, Doom running in Notepad, Doom running on insert bizarre object here.
Do not insert bizarre objects.
No, don't insert bizarre objects. But in fact, in my kitchen, we've got one of those fancy Thermomix cooking machines, and I've no doubt Doom could probably run on that as well. Will I try it? No, there's no way I'm going to try it. And I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but I really am, because we appreciate the story submissions. And just in case anybody's having trouble interpreting my dry sense of humor, we do enjoy reading those stories. But, if we ran every Doom story that gets posted, we'd literally be doing one every week. So do keep them coming, and don't be offended if we don't run with it. But besides, does it run on Doom? It's kind of old hat now. Does it run on Quake? That's a bit more of a challenge. That's worth talking about. And the first cab off the ranks on that particular challenge is the 128K Sinclair Spectrum. Yep. There are a couple of demos floating around on the internet showing not quite Quake, but what they're referring to as Quake engine on a Spectrum. So it's full flat shade 3D levels, and even there's some enemies bouncing around the place. And in one video posted by Saberman, there's even a 3D polygon shambler on display. The big annoying white-looking thing that shoots lightning at you. Yep, one of those floating around in a Spectrum level. So basically, the video actually looks very smooth, and it's reported to support both 7 and 14 megahertz spectrums, according to the video descriptions. And also an
14
article.
megahertz spectrums?
Yeah, 14 megahertz.
Were there any native 14 megahertz spectrums, or was that an upgrade?
That would be aimed at the Spectrum Next, I think.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Of course.
And there's also some information on it on indieretronews.com as well. While it's not a finished game at this point, you can walk around using WASD controls on your Spectrum. And yes, you can download this and give it a go yourself. Neil, have you had a look? What do you make of this?
Well, I'm sure I probably had the same first thought when I looked at this as you two did, which was the word Freescape, the old Freescape 3D engine that powered a lot of games such as Total Eclipse and Driller on your 8 and 16-bit micros. You're reaching for something there, Chris. I've got a feeling you're going to hold something up. It's Driller. He's got his copy
Driller's
of Driller.
A great game. Driller's a great game. Hello, Rich. You like Driller?
So
you'll be happy to see that.
But I think the most influential of all of them for me personally was 3D Construction Kit, which was the kit where you could make your own Freescape games, which came with a gold VHS cassette tape showing you some examples on there. I really loved that. I probably used that more than any single Freescape game, just messing around in the construction kit. But this example in particular, it does have some uniqueness to it over those Freescape engines. I think it does have a different feel to it. First of all, it's called the Quake engine. Is it doing anything to kind of tap into any original map files or anything like that? I mean, is it just sort of mimicking Quake? I guess it's just because it's trying to sort of show a representation of the Quake game, but this is not it's not a port as such, is it?
No, that's right. We'll come to that a bit later. Yeah.
Oh, okay. You've got some more info on that.
Down in the notes, yeah.
Okay. Well, it does move at an impressive speed for the power available. There's a little number down at the bottom left-hand side of the demo. Is that the frames per second? It sort of goes up and down. I think it probably is. And if so, we're hitting a whole 5 frames per second. And I'm not sure if those demos are the 14 or the 7 megahertz version. Do you know?
No, I don't actually.
No.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're hitting 5 frames per second, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're used to a Freescape game, that's pretty smooth. And then there are these little enemies that bounce around and come at you. Now, I'm not sure if my eyes deceive me or not, but the little bouncy enemy, the little sort of frog-type enemy that comes towards you, it looks very much like a filled texture-mapped 3D enemy. Is that the case? Because if that's the case, then that's pretty mind-blowing to me on a ZX Spectrum. There must be a huge amount of trickery going on. Even if that's not the case, to make it look like that's the case, it works really well. And they must be using, decades of experience and tips and tricks to get that every last cycle out of the Spectrum to make that kind of thing happen. I mean, it looks nothing like the Quake I know, but it is seriously impressive seeing this on a ZX Spectrum.
Yeah, well, even if you look at the video that's floating around with the Shambler model, that's a really impressive model, and it's got that whole mouth and face thing going as it rotates around. So
yeah, and it's got like textures on its ankles and around its face. That's got to be polygon. That's not a sprite as such, is it?
No, that's right.
And even if it was a sprite, the Spectrum doesn't have any kind of hardware sprite assistance anyway, so it's still impressive.
Yeah. No, it is really impressive to look at, and it's the speed, like you say, the Freescape engines. I mean, we've discussed Freescape quite a few times on this show, but as specifically in the 8-bit era, it was slow. If we're honest, it was fantastic to you did feel like you were in this sort of free roaming 3D space with the technology available at the time, and you could look up, down, left, right, walk around. But generally, it was quite slow, and you would end up licking the walls just to increase the frame rate, because the less things you were looking at, the faster it would go.
Licking the walls.
Yes, licking the walls.
Licking the walls.
Is that an Australian expression?
No, it's a gaming expression. Yeah. I actually picked that up from following the Dread project, and they said, please don't go around licking the walls because there are some glitches.
I was on Twitter this morning, and completely off topic, there was the end of a NASCAR race that happened, and this guy needed to come like second instead of third to qualify and keep his championship hopes alive. Did you see this clip? And on the last corner,
telling me about it today.
On the last corner, instead of braking, he just floored it, smashed into the wall, and I guess licked the wall all the way around and took second place. He just smashed his car up and took it. It's quite an incredible clip to watch. You don't get that in Formula One. Anyway, I've completely forgotten what I was going to tell you about now. I had a point to this. What were we talking about? Licking the walls?
Licking windows.
Okay. The slowness. The slowness of Freescape is fine because it's a completely different experience to a Quake experience. The slowness brings a level of sort of suspense and almost what we were talking about last week, horror to some of these games, the suspense of what's through the next
Castle
room.
Master.
Exactly that. So it's fine that it's slow, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, totally agree. And at the end of the day, that was the technology available at the time. And the other thing that made the Freescape games work is everything was split up into rooms. Even if it was an outdoor area, generally they'd find some way of, sort of caging it in, and then you had to activate something to progress, and it would essentially load an entirely new room, which was very clever way of getting around the limitations. But the Spectrum did have other games as well that were sort of 3D polygon based, and the one that springs to mind, and I didn't play this on the Spectrum, I had it on the Amiga, but Carrier Command. Now, the thought of the Spectrum even attempting to play a 3D, let's call it simulator in inverted commas, just blows my mind. And if you look at YouTube videos of Carrier Command on the Spectrum, it's a combination. How they've done it is a combination of flat shade polygons and wireframe. So the vehicles are generally wireframe. But things like the carrier itself is 3D polygon. The islands are 3D polygon. Any mountains on the islands are 3D polygon. And it's an acceptable playing experience.
Not all 3D examples on the Spectrum are great. The one I would bring up is hard driving. If you've ever tried to play hard driving on a Spectrum.
Not on a Spectrum, no.
It's painful enough on the 16 bits, but
yes.
Yeah, they attempted it on the Spectrum and woof. Yep.
I credit hard driving in the arcade with teaching me how to drive, but that's a whole other story for another day. Oh, yeah. The first time I operated an accelerator, brake, and clutch was in hard driving. The first time I drove my dad's car, I could do it perfectly. Well, not perfectly, but, I knew how to start the car, how to operate it, how to change gear because of spending time on hard driving.
Did you drive into the cow?
That was the first time he licked the wall.
No, I drove it through a barn. But funnily enough, so the developers that have put this, what we're currently calling the Quake engine for Spectrum, out there, they're from the same part of the world as Zoysia, which I have mentioned before, and Zoysia make modern games for the Spectrum as well. And the one that springs to mind in the context of this conversation is this one called The Dark. I'm holding up here. So for those of you listening, I'm holding up a box that says The Dark on it. Oh, it is. Dave, you'll like this. Hang on. Let me just open it up. The best thing about this package is the manual. So I'll try and describe it for the listeners. It's like this felt or almost sort of leatherette feeling on the outside, a felt feeling on the inside of the opening covers, string bound. Each one of these manuals is put together by hand. And
it looks
it's
like
sort
a
of got
medieval
parchment. Yeah,
like a medieval leather-bound notepad. Yeah,
that's it. And so the pages
Lovely
that are coloured in,
hand-drawn art.
each one is hand drawn and hand painted. They don't fill everywhere. So every single one of these manuals would be different as well. They only did that for this game. All the other games, they're generally
how many pages?
Manuals.
How many pages?
They're not numbered because you couldn't number pages in medieval times because they couldn't count. So yeah, there's no.
Didn't have numbers then. Nobody invented them.
There was no numbers in medieval times. You couldn't count any. It was impossible.
I don't think they invented it. Apparently, number 0 was only invented recently, which I don't understand how you can do things without 0. But there you go.
Well, it's not a number, is it? It's a lack of numbers. It's a lack of data. Anyway, why am I talking about The Dark? I'm talking about The Dark because it's a first-person shooter for the Spectrum, and it actually runs on a 48K. So it's not quite as good as what we're now seeing now in this, in inverted commas, Quake engine coming out, because it is a combination of flat shade and sprites. So probably more similar to Doom or probably more similar to Wolfenstein 3D than Quake. But it's a very playable game, even on the 48K Spectrum. Definitely worth a look. I think you can actually, their games, you can't currently buy them, but you can download them off their website. So do check that out. It's really, really cool. Yeah.
So I love the Freescape games. I know that we struggle. Neil's talked about the frame rates. We struggle now initially when you see them and you see the frame rates. It could be literally 1 or 2 frames a second as they draw. But I would suggest you stick with it because they were designed with that in mind. Unlike running, I was thinking back to your video of Doom and Dread from about a year ago, when you were talking about how unplayable Doom was on a really weak 386, and you're better off playing a game that's suited to it. And you're right, where you think about playing a modern game and getting 5 frames a second makes it unplayable. The Freescape games are not unplayable at that frames a second because that's what they're designed to be. So they're perfectly good at that. So do stick with them. They were actually developed in the CPC, and just like the Atari ST was for 16-bit, the CPC had the most processing power, but it didn't have all the graphics helping chips, nor did the ST that the Commodore 64 and the Amiga did. So 3D was actually quite good in those because they had the raw power for it rather than the sprite stuff. But actually the Spectrum was great for 3D as well because the Spectrum didn't have the graphics helping stuff, but it had the color attributes, which is what's responsible for color clash. But it's one of the Spectrum's biggest strengths is that they take so little effort to move, compared to other systems, so little effort to move graphics data around in memory that they can end up being quite fast. So that's probably why this Quake thing, I mean, I don't know enough to say, but I would guess you can do this Quake thing in a Spectrum, but you couldn't do it in a CPC or a C64. The Quake thing's pretty impressive, though. I mean, it's not Quake, but it's Quake-like. You get a Quake vibe from it. Carrier Command you mentioned, though, I love that in my ST. It's a wonderful strategy game. It's a strategy mixed with simulation. It's a great game. It's fantastic. I'd like to find some time to look at the sequel that came out 2 or 3 years ago, Carrier Command 2. Neil, have you played that?
I played plenty of Carrier Command. I haven't played Carrier Command 2, no. I was just thinking about what you were saying about the color attributes and things, and you're right. It takes less bytes of information to describe color on a Spectrum because, you've got blocks of color rather than individual pixel colors. But I don't think I saw any color in this Quake engine game, so I think it is just pushing black and white pixels around.
Using dithering to sort of.
There was no colour in it, but I think that the whole screen memory of a Spectrum is much smaller than other systems. On the Amstrad, you would have to describe the colour. You'd have to.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
you would have to describe it as black and white, and
okay,
that makes sense.
But no, in terms of sequels, again, I'm just going to go off on a tangent. You mentioned Carrier Command 2. I have been playing a sequel this week of a brand new game of a new version of Arkanoid. It's called Arkanoid Eternal Battle, I think it's called. I'm just firing up my Steam account here so I can just remind myself of the exact name of it. Now, when you get Retro Remix, they don't always hit the mark. They sometimes feel a bit lazy, but this one actually really hits the spot for me. Yeah, Arkanoid Eternal Battle, it's called. You can play the classic retro Arkanoid, and it brings up like an arcade screen, and you have the background noise of, the ambience of an arcade. Quite fun. But I guess the real showpiece of this is there's a multiplayer version where 24 of you all play against each other, Arkanoid at once.
I was going to say a two-player version, and you've got one player on each side, and there's just the ball, and you pass it between you.
Imagine that. Imagine that. What would you call that? But yeah, 24 players. So you haven't got 24 bats on the screen. You've got your screen, and you're playing, and you're clocking up a score, and then you can see other people's screens around, all moving according to how many points they've got. Until you get down to the last 4. And then when you get to the last 4, then you've got 4 bats, and you've got sort of a 4-player single screen battle going on to see who's the winner. And it's a really nice spin on Arkanoid. Anyway,
do you have a spinner to play it with?
I don't. I play it with the mouse, but a spinner would be the ultimate way to play it. Yeah. Anyway, back to Quake, Chris.
Yeah, well, actually, I do need to, at this point, mention Duncan, because thank you, Duncan, for mentioning this story and making us aware of it. And I have to let everybody know it did get 11 upvotes from the community, so it's not just because it was Duncan that posted the story that made me choose it. It was, it was found worthy by you guys. So we'll add in the show notes the article by Indie Retro News as well, I think. Because if you follow the links, you'll find your way to where you can download this engine from if you want to have a go in an emulator or on a real Spectrum. According to several sources, this is actually the work of 2 coders, Alone Coder and Dragon's Lord. There's a lot of videos out there emerging on this, including one from Silent Gamer RZX. And in fact, Dragon's Lord 76 is in the comments of Silent Game RZX's video stating this. He says, portals with doors do not yet work in this version. The physics of collision with walls too. The beautiful sky back panorama is turned off, but it still exists. Shooting will be added later, by the way. You didn't find one of the secrets. So I'm mentioning that because clearly there's more to this than we're seeing in the videos that are doing the rounds at the moment. And I've also made contact via email with Dimitri, who is a lone coder. And he very kindly sent me a reply email and said, I am the author of this engine. It's named InfoGuide 3D Engine. So they're not actually calling it the Quake engine. It's what other people seem to be nicknaming it. Okay, so it's called InfoGuide 3D Engine, as it was published in InfoGuide Disc Zine 12 and 13, and there are other demos made with it by Dragon's Lord. So I get the impression it's Dragon's Lord that's put together this sort of Quake-esque level that's being shown off at the moment. So I just think it's a great piece of work. I think it's fantastic. Certainly another project I'll be watching with interest, and hopefully somebody will make a full game with it down the line. So whilst the Dread project, which is another one I'm excited about, is proving that the Amiga and the Atari ST could have had a Doom-like experience, the Spectrum is busy playing Quake. Kind of.
Has anyone thought about putting a retro museum in a mill, Neil?
Stupid idea. You'd probably kill yourself having to carry everything up the stairs.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Local has submitted a story from a local paper in Leigh. Now, Leigh is up north in Greater Manchester, mad for it in Manchester. That's all my accents now. A man called Joe Kay has been building a retro museum in a turn of the 20th century mill called Spinner's Mill. Him and I think between 20 and 30 volunteers are going to build what sounds like a very extensive museum with a number of exhibit areas. This sounds quite big, quite impressive what he's doing. Joe says, we will showcase the history of digital technology and how it has developed through the decades, highlighting how the past and future come together. So it's not the same gaming focus that you have, Neil. It's more about the technology. It's an article that was submitted about it in the local paper from Leigh. But I do happen to know one of the volunteers that Joe uses, which is Jack, and Jack says the plan is a museum, an educational suite, a 70s and 80s office, an arcade room, a VR corner, a history of printing, an internet cafe, a library, and a gift shop and component shop. I noticed that Joe has made little kits to get people used to building little electronics things, like kind of little starter kits that you might have got as a present in the 80s. So there's that going on there. And Jack says they had a jumble sale that went amazingly well. He said it's great to network with so many people that are interested. He said it's great to have a lot of volunteers there in the community, helped us make some space and funds to contribute to construct the dream. I think there's room for a lot of these museums. Because to be frank, it's actually very expensive to visit Neil in the Cave for me. I just happened to be looking at whether I could go down in November. But by the time I've paid for petrol and a hotel room, it's 200. Neil's put on sad music. It's 200 quid for me just for a day's visit, so it's a bit of a stretch to go 2 or 3 times a year for that. Flying reduces the cost, but it leaves me in Bristol, it's a long way away, and trains are difficult to negotiate. But on the other hand, me driving down to Manchester, it's still a fair way, but it's not that big a deal. I could get there and back in a day, and I imagine for most of the UK, Manchester isn't too far away for anyone, and maybe if you're down in Cornwall or something, but it's not too far away that you can't go there and back in a day. But I also found out that my friend Reese from ctrl-alt-rees has done a video, and I'd done my research, and then he came out with this video. He's been up to visit, and he's done a great little video on it. It explains it in much better than I can here, so I'd suggest you have a look at that. And he has given us permission to put the video on in the background, so you will see little bits from the video there. But it looks very impressive. And Joe comes across really well. So, Neil, what's your thinking about the competition? Are you going to sabotage them? Or maybe you fancy a trip to Wigan for a Wigan pie, and maybe we can meet for a beer there?
Can we have some pea wet with our Wigan kebabs?
Yeah, moisten up your chips.
Moisten up your chips.
Are you guys speaking English?
I think this is brilliant. I would say Manchester, even for me, I would probably want an overnight stay. That's a bit of a slog to get up there and back, but it's doable. A large part of the reason I opened up the cave to the public is because there were just no real places around my area where you could have this experience. I mean, no doubt there are lots of people in Leigh now, or the Manchester area, who are super excited for this to open for the same reason. But also further afield, there are quite a few of these places opening now. Just last week, I had an email from someone opening a new museum in Derby. So that's the derbycomputermuseum.com. They kindly invited me to their opening event, and I need to get back to them because I was going to think about maybe doing a little visit like Reese has done, like we've both done at the Leicester Museum before, just to kind of help get the word out there. And I think what all these places create is a nice kind of circuit, if you like, of different museums, all with our own different kind of approach and take on it. And we can all do that circuit, and we can enjoy the retro circuit around the country. The one in Leigh or Derby, for example, I'd probably quite like to base a long weekend around it. Maybe visit the museum as the focus, go on a little trip. It's a nice alternative to a National Trust venue or a garden centre or somewhere like that. And I can take Lily, and she's not really interested in that kind of thing, but I can go to the museum on the Saturday. We can explore the rest of the area on the Sunday, go for some nice dinner on a Saturday night. Sounds like a good weekend to me. So I'm all for more and more of these places opening up. This one looks very well organised. It sounds like it's got a great bunch of volunteers, Jack included, a good number of volunteers, which is very much needed. And it looks like it's all coming together really well. I must admit, I have been privy to some videos of them a couple of months back, which Jack sent me a little tour of them building it in the early days. I think we mentioned it on the show before, maybe. And it's really taken shape. If I do visit, there is one thing I will sabotage, though. I've heard on the grapevine that they have a lift, and that does make me jealous. So I think I'm just going to go in. I'm just going to press all the buttons on the lift. That's what I'm going to do, and then go up and enjoy it. Is that sabotage enough?
Yeah, that'll do. That's as strong as anyone could expect from you, Neil. No, I agree that there's room for lots of these places to exist. For your general public, you're not going to travel, you're not going to drive more than an hour to visit one of these places. So you can have the greatest attraction in Stroud, and you can have, and you're not going to get someone from Glasgow unless they're a bit special like me going down. Whereas someone in Manchester, the whole area around Manchester, they would all go to that. The one it's not going to take any business away from Leicester or Derby or Stroud. So the more of these, the better. Asked for a bit of info on the guy, Joe, who's running it. It turns out he used to run a computer shop. So maybe even he could put a computer shop in the mill. That'd be an interesting idea, but an old style computer shop in.
What, a fake computer shop?
Yeah.
I might have some leftover beige slapboard he can have.
Reese was really positive about Joe, though. He seems to be he seems to be doing this for really good reasons. It seems to be quite into the education side of things as well. So that'll be quite good if it maybe inspires a new generation there. Chris, do you think you might stop off there next time you're on your travels back home in England?
Well, funny enough, next time I'm in England, or maybe the time after, because the next one will be a flying visit. But I actually need to visit the cave again, because I'd like to actually experience it on a patron day or a public day, because I want to get that vibe that I see other people experiencing. It was great, and I really appreciate the time that you gave me, Neil, when I did come over.
It goes in a flash.
You're
there, and then it's lunchtime and you're away.
Yeah. But part of the whole experience I'm seeing on other people's videos is the fact that there's lots of people there, or there's a presentation, and I want to be part of that. So I would actually prioritize that first. So sorry to the guy setting up this new one, but I'd certainly visit another place. Yeah, go on.
What I would say is I get a very positive response from recording any guest speakers or speeches that happen there. So as this is the early days for this museum and the Derby Museum setting up, I would recommend that you think about a public speaker space, and also think about being able to record those and get them up on YouTube for people to explore, because the audience for this stuff is far bigger than just those who can come and visit you. And the more you can share what you're doing in there, the better. So that would be my tip. Yeah,
that's true. He's not sabotaging them, Dave. He's helping them. What's going on? We're gonna have to take him out the back and teach him how it's done. But anyway, no, I'd certainly visit another place like this if I happen to be passing. I mean, it's a long way to go out your way, but certainly if I'm traveling up and down the country, then and I can make time to pop into a place like this, absolutely. I say that keep in mind I've still not visited a single nostalgia place that we've got here in Perth. I've mentioned several of them in previous shows, so I really need to make time to do that before I fly to the other side of the world and do the ones over there.
I was thinking it might suit you, because if you're down in the south of England, which I think was where you're originally from, and you're driving, is it Kent you're from?
Yeah.
And you're driving up to Glasgow to see your brother, then you can stop halfway in Manchester.
It's true.
It's not open right now, and they don't want to tie themselves to a date. But from Reese's video, which will be linked here, and I think it will be. Reese has assured me it will be public by the time that this episode is broadcast into your ears. They're hoping and trying to be open for Christmas this year, but a few things that keep frustrating them are outside of their control. So we'll keep you up to date. We'll let you know when the date is, and maybe come back to them for more information at some other time when it happens. But good luck to them. It looks as if it's going to be an incredible thing to go to. To me, it looks as if you would have to go 2 or 3 times to see all of it properly. But yeah, good luck to them, and the more the merrier.
Time now for our community question of the week. So we'll start with last week's question, which was all about scary games for Halloween. So the question was, name your favourite scary game. Obviously, we are thinking older games, but we'll take anything up to the PS3 era. And Duncan has added a little note here. He says, I can't think of any 8-bit games that jump at me. Neil mentioned Darkseid on the Amiga, but I would have to go with the PlayStation 1 and Silent Hill before I think of a game that really unsettled me. So Unsettled by Silent Hill. The title always reminds me of that remake of House on Haunted Hill, the film. Did you ever see that? Very odd. Trying so hard to the point of being kind of funny.
No, I don't like that.
Anyway, so we've got the answers. I'll read the first one out. And the first one actually stimulated quite a lot of conversation over on my Discord. It's from Warshi7819, and they say Doom 3 on my PC. It was also mentioned in the show by Chris, Doom 3. They say it's my second scariest since somebody already pointed out Dead Space for the Xbox 360. I remember having to install beta release drivers for my video card. Oh yeah, I remember this, to be able to play the game at all. I sat down in a dark room with headphones, and the first time the lights went out in the game and a monster came jumping at me, I almost died. Well, Chris talked about that, using the torches, the darkness, and you've just triggered a memory there. People having to find beta, brand new video card drivers released just to make this game playable and get the most out of it.
That must have been a popular thing, buggy games at release, because that's all the rage now.
I'm not sure it was necessarily that the game was buggy. I think it was that it was perhaps using features on cutting edge video cards that were either possible but not enabled by existing drivers, or they had to sort of do workarounds to allow the game to run. So I guess that was just the price of being on the cutting edge.
I think real-time shadows were the challenge for it, because that was the thing that made the flashlight so awesome, was you could literally freak yourself out just by shining the torch around a stairwell and getting shadows of the banisters. It was amazing. Yeah.
Chris, do you want to read the next answer?
Yep. So Paul, aka Hermsky, says the 7th Guest and the 11th Hour were two of my favourites. Love the puzzles and taking your time to explore the spooky house without being rushed. The music still sends chills down my spine.
See, that makes me feel bad now, because I kind of dissed 7th Guest as a tech demo last week. But, we're all scared by different things. So sorry about that, Paul. You accidentally skipped an answer there between the two, which was just a short one from Shepo71, who said Dead Space on the Xbox 360. To which Warshi replies, yeah, I was going to say this. Not only is it scary, but it's probably the best FPS I've ever played. I recently discovered that there's a third game out there and the fourth in the making, but I've only ever played the first two. So
I need to play that. I've never played
Dead Space.
No, I've not played Dead Space.
But we're getting a bit new now. We're getting into the Xbox 360 days.
It's true. Quick, back into retro territory.
Yeah.
I'll go back into retro then. And the one that appears fourth on my list is... because they're a slightly different order that sometimes happens on Reddit, thanks to the magic it does. It's from Happy Coding ZX. So Alan says, I used to play Phantom Slayer on the Dragon 32 Coco. He's going to go in Coco in brackets because the Tandy color computer is the equivalent which most of the games ran on in the USA, with the lights off, and it was genuinely scary. Considered a forerunner of both FPS and survival horror games, it's a bit like 3D Monster Maze, which he says is also a classic, and I love the box art for that, but with a spooky hooded phantoms. On slightly more modern systems, the original Fatal Frame Project Zero is still the scariest thing I've played.
Fantastic. Some of the other answers I'll just pick out that we had from Toxic Seahorse was it came from the desert on the Amiga, Granny's Garden. Granny's Garden.
Fizgit.
Remember that on the BBC Micro. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream from Logical Associate.
Oh yeah. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a point and click game. I think it's based. It's quite a horrifying thing. There's some dark secrets there that you explore as you go through it. It's really good.
We've got lots of Resident Evils. We've got Project Firestart for the Commodore 64 from Kefka Floyd. Half-Life from Crispy Nut. You've done Phantom Slayer. And some more Silent Hills, and then a bonus from Crispy Nut. Attic Attack was probably my first spooky game. I know that's a favourite of yours, Chris, a bit of Attic Attack. Did you find it spooky?
Not so much spooky. Yeah, just fun. I can't believe, going through the answers, I can't believe I didn't mention Resident Evil last week on the original PlayStation. I think it's the scene where you're walking down one of the corridors and the dogs jump through the windows at you. Fantastic. So many jump scares, but they didn't feel like jump scares. They felt like part of the action. And the limited camera angles really added to that. It was amazing.
I think the reason Resident Evil didn't really jump out for me is because I'd played Alone in the Dark and Alone in the Dark 2, and I was very familiar with the sort of the tank controls, the camera views, the jump scares, things jumping through the windows. So I felt a bit like it was, a rehash of Alone in the Dark, which it was. But then, of course, it took things a lot further, especially when you got to having a custom chainsaw-shaped controller to play it.
Don't remember that.
You didn't? Oh, you looked that one up. Look that one up.
Oh, we'll.
So, our question of the week for this week, quite simply, we're gonna stay with gaming-based TV shows, or any TV show with a section, I guess, of gaming that appeared that just made you sit on the edge of your seat and go, okay, I've been acknowledged, I've been seen, my hobby, my love of computing, because it was so infrequent in the 90s. When anything appeared on the telly, you just sat up and you just savored every second of it. So favorite TV shows based on video gaming or computers or technology, or just any appearance of technology or video games that you want to share with us. Bonus points if you can find a link to it on YouTube and we can sit down and have a watch and give you our feedback on that. Let's just sort of share our 90s TV memories. That would be really interesting from the international. I think you're about to say the same thing, Dave. If they're from the international
from outside the UK, because what did you watch in the USA and Canada? What did you watch in Australia, or what did you watch in India, or anywhere else? Anywhere that we wouldn't know about. There must be stuff there.
Did you have your own version of Tomorrow's World? Did you have your own version of the flight simulator in the Krypton Factor? Send us a link. I want to see it.
Did you have television?
Did you have colour?
Peter Cage, you remember this thing?
On that note, thank you very much, everyone, for listening and for watching. As always, from myself, from Dave, and from Chris, take care, and we'll see you next week on This Week in Retro. Bye-bye.
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 This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave, Chris from 005 Agema, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.